What does it take to dedicate your life to freeing the innocent? Today's guest, Justin Brooks, has spent more than 3 decades finding out. As the founder of the California Innocence Project, he has helped exonerate over 40 people, walked more than 200 off death row, and has built a global movement spanning 66 U.S. organizations and close to 40 more across Latin America. The fun thing about today's show is that Justin and I go back 36 years, all the way back to our days at Georgetown Law School in the street law clinic. And it makes this conversation as personal as it is profound. In particular, we cover the Brian Banks case, which is made into a movie. It's fairly famous. We talk about the hidden crisis of plea bargaining. I learned some things that I didn't know before. And the role that media is playing in driving criminal justice reform, along with the emotional toll of fighting a system that too often fails the people it was built to protect. I'm host Aaron Strout, and in this conversation, we talk about resilience, purpose, and what it truly means to fight for justice. Well, Justin, it is a true pleasure to see you, and I know we were just reminiscing about the fact that I think we've known each other for 36 years, which is a mighty long time.
36 years.
We were babies when we first met back at Georgetown, and you were a law professor. Or you working at the DC Street Law, and I was just a mere grad student at the time working in the street law clinic.
Clinical teaching fellow at Georgetown, and then I became a visiting professor there. So yeah, and you came on board, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, studying Russian something. And,
Russian studies, a very expensive history degree at this point, but everything turned out okay in the long run.
So far, so good.
So far, so good. So, and the other thing it's worth mentioning is for the listeners, Justin is sitting in his cottage in England. I won't disclose exactly where, but in a 270-year-old stone cottage writing his next book. And that's pretty cool because you don't get a chance to talk to many people that are in houses older than the country is right now.
It's very nice. It's so relaxing. It's incredible.
Well, that's awesome. And I'm really looking forward to our story. And I think it's one of those things for anyone that has a friend that you have known for 36 years and you realize like, wow, this person has done some pretty incredible things, especially when you sit down to write questions for them. I think I knew most of them, but it was definitely one where it's cool to be able to honor that. And so I am looking forward to this. And I guess with that, I want to start with your origin story. So, fast forward past Georgetown. You founded something called the California Innocence Project. This was 1999. This year our oldest daughter was born. She just turned 27 yesterday, which is hard to believe. I know you have older kids as well. This was after an early case involving an innocent woman who pleaded guilty and was sentenced to death. Take us back to that moment. Tell us what it felt like, and how did that change the direction of your life?
Yeah, so in 1995, I was a law professor in Michigan, just teaching law school. And I read about a young woman on death row in Illinois, and the article said she was sentenced to death on a plea bargain. And I just thought, that can't be right. Nobody gets sentenced.
Doesn't sound like a good bargain. No.
No, it's a plea, but it's not really a bargain. So I went and met with her on death row, and to find out her story. I don't know what fully compelled me to do that, but I did. And then she told me she was innocent. So I told my students about it, my first year criminal law students, and I said, "Who wants to help me out? This woman says she's innocent. Let's take a look. Let's see if she is." And we went out to the crime scene, and we found a mountain of evidence that she was innocent. So that's how I entered the Innocence Project world. And then 4 years later, I quit my job as a law professor, moved to California, and started the California Innocence Project. At that point, there were 6 or 7 of us doing this kind of work around the world. Now we have 66 projects in the United States. We got about 40 more around in other countries. And it's become this kind of global movement that I've been working in now more than 3 decades.
Well, bless you for doing the work you're doing. And I guess this next question will sort of help people understand the gravity of this. And obviously there's a pretty famous movie that we'll get into as well that I learned a lot about the project. But over 24 years, and this probably is even undercounting what you've done, you've helped free 40 innocent people from prison. How do you personally carry the weight of these cases? And I think I probably know the answer because I know you are a resilient dude and you seem to be able to compartmentalize well, but I'd love to get your take on these cases, and then there are times where I'm sure you don't get the exoneration, and you know the person's innocent. You put in all this work, so how do you sort of go forward knowing that there are these cases, and there's some that you will never get to. That's the other shame, right? Is that you can't solve or take on every single case in the justice system. You have to prioritize.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this lately because I'm one of the people who's been doing this the longest. I was the longest director of an innocence project in the world. And so I talk to young lawyers about it all the time. For a lot of years, I made sure my lawyers got into therapy, and but in the back of my stupid old head, I was like, yeah, but you're fine. You don't need it. And it catches up to you. And you're right. You've identified exactly that. The wins are fantastic, and you walk out of prison, you got the guy's hand in the air, everybody's happy, you have a fantastic day. But man, the losses start piling up on you. And the losses, and on top of it, yeah, the people you say no to. I say no to people every day. Thousands of people every year ask for my help. And you can only help so many people. So they've got to be really compelling cases of innocence. And I know even in those cases, we're going to lose some of them. So it does mentally stack up. So I do a lot of stuff for my mental health. I mean, I'm lucky to live in San Diego and at the beach. I'm lucky to have a little old stone cottage in northern England where there's no
Right.
crime. And I'm on a little cobblestone street here where I know all my neighbors. I exercise every day. I'm still holding that vegetarian diet I had when I met you. I try to not watch anything criminal on TV. I watch HGTV. Give me a couple trying to pick out a countertop, and I'm in. I just try
That's
to do as
that.
much
I was just
possible.
gonna say that's probably a healthy way to approach it, because I also love HGTV and the Food Network and things like that. And I am happy to hear. Obviously, I know that you've always taken good care of yourself. And funny little side story. Justin and I think we're both on pretty tight budgets back in '91, and when we were at the DC Street Law, which is at the Georgetown Law School, there was a cafeteria downstairs, and we figured out how to game the system. It was basically I think it was like a $3.50
You
or
can put
$4
as
all you could eat
much,
salad. Yeah, and
all you can get in that little bowl.
well, Justin taught me the trick of you want to put as much heavy stuff in there. So we would like load it up with cottage cheese and beans and all of those things, and
Oh
then
my
have the
God.
dressing on the side, so like you didn't have any of that spilling out. Um,
That is
because we had no
so
money.
funny.
But yeah, that is. I mean, I'm glad to hear
I
that you're still
I remember
vegetarian all these
saying
years later.
cottage. I remember saying to cottage cheese at the foundation. You got to
It
build
was the
from there.
foundation. Yes, cottage cheese, beets, garbanzo beans, and all that good stuff. So, um, I do want to get to something that sort of I think is a natural lead in from where you left that last story, and this is where I really realized, oh yeah, there are a lot of people that you have to say no to, and even in this very famous case, I think you actually did say no a number of times. So people may have heard of the Brian Banks story. So Brian Banks was a 17-year-old facing 41 years to life in prison when he made the agonizing decision to take a plea deal for a crime he ultimately did not commit. I don't think I'm spoiling anything, because they probably wouldn't have made the movie if that wasn't the outcome, right? What does that case teach us about the courage it takes to survive an unjust system? Because he had to, he spent some of those years in prison. And what does the true redemption look like after a wrongful conviction?
Yeah, so my clients are really special people. I mean, what it takes to survive. It's hard enough to survive in prison. Surviving in prison as an innocent person adds a whole new layer to it. Because every morning you wake up in a surrealistic nightmare of, I'm not supposed to be here. And every day you're fighting those charges. So if you've committed a crime and you're in prison, eventually you come to, okay, I did it, I got caught, I'm doing my time. And if we're honest about it, most of those guys probably did more crimes than they got caught for, and
True.
they got caught for the ones they're doing
Yeah.
time for, right? So it was maybe the first time they'd sold drugs or whatever the crime is. And so, but my clients do not do good time in that sense. And so it takes incredible resilience for them to survive prison, which is an environment they would never expect to be in, and then to fight for their case the whole way till they're freed. And then even after they're freed, they got to keep fighting. They got to get their name back. They got to clear their record. They got to do this. They got to do that. So Brian was one of those guys. He just refused to quit. He did repeatedly write me from prison, and I had to tell him, like, there's no new evidence. I can't prove this case without new evidence. Got to be something. And then this woman came forward and admitted that he had never raped her. Actually, Facebook friend requested him and said, "Can we let bygones be bygones? I'm
Oh
sorry I
my
made up
gosh.
stuff
Yeah.
about you raping me in high school." And yeah, Hollywood came calling because it had, sex, it had crime, and it had football. Because Brian was one of the best high school football players in the country, and he ended up ultimately playing for the Atlanta Falcons for a short period of time. And it was really quite a journey to be on that with him. I actually went to all the tryouts. He actually lived with my family for a while. And seeing my client go from the lowest of the low to running out on the field on Monday Night Football was pretty incredible.
Well, that is incredible. And I think one of the other things that was incredible is I think you had told me before the movie came out, or if not, then somehow I get a whiff of it. But this guy named Greg Kinnear, pretty famous actor. I think he's won some Academy Awards or definitely some other important acting awards. So he played you in the movie, and you just talked about the fact that it's based on that true story of Brian Banks. I want to talk about the storytelling, though, and especially in the form of Hollywood production, and why is that so essential to driving change? Because I'm guessing this was probably a hard decision for you, right? Obviously, it's like cool to have a movie made about your life, but you're not that guy. I can tell people you're not that guy that's like, let me chase glitz. It has to serve a purpose. And so I'm guessing that probably had a little bit to do with why you decided to go down that path.
Yeah, this story particularly for me was important because as a trial lawyer and then doing the work that I've done in post-conviction, the plea bargaining to me is the biggest evil in our system. Now more than 95% of cases are resolved by plea. And people don't realize that. They watch TV and movies, they see all these trials going on, and they think it's a system of trials, and it's not. It's a system of just negotiated pleas. So that's why this story was important to me. Um, Making a movie, though, man, I mean, it was a 7-year journey from my first meeting with a production company about the idea and then seeing it in theaters. And Greg Kinnear's a fantastic guy. He was following me around the law school, and I was getting texts from other professors saying, "Why is Greg Kinnear following behind you and while you're talking to students in the
I don't
hallway?"
know. Someone called the police. This guy's stalking me.
Exactly. But your question of why is it important? It's unbelievably important in this work, and it's not just movies. It's movies, TV, podcasts. What we're doing right now. I mean, podcasts have really moved the ball in the innocence world.
Yeah, it's true.
Serial on NPR. There's all kinds of crime podcasts. Making a Murderer on Netflix. All these docu-series. The general public now understands that innocent people go to prison. And that wasn't true when I started this work. I had arguments with people all the time about it. And now we've documented almost 4,000 cases of wrongful conviction in the United States. We've walked more than 200 people off death row, including my client, Marilyn Malero. And then, so those are people who went through the entire system, got sentenced to death. And they're the lucky ones because we know people are left behind. We know those are the lucky ones where there was evidence that could ultimately prove them innocent that was compelling enough to get a judge in our system where judges get elected to do the politically difficult thing and free someone from prison. So it's been an amazing partnership, I think, with the media, our movement over the last few decades.
Well, thank you for sharing that, because I think subconsciously I knew that, but hadn't really put the pieces together and had seen your movie, but thinking about the podcast and thinking about some of the docuseries. And it is good to know that, it is making a difference and helping to chip away. And, someday maybe we'll get to a place where maybe AI will help us make better decisions around who goes to jail and who doesn't and all that stuff. And I don't mean that lightly. It sounds like I do. I don't mean that lightly.
That's a podcast in itself.
Yeah,
And it's an
exactly.
interesting discussion too, because part of me says, yeah, let's turn it all over to AI. Our system's terrible. And then I read and say, well, garbage in, garbage out. AI will have some of the same biases that we all
true.
have.
Yeah.
But we're going to get there. And
Yeah.
I think it's going to be better. It won't be perfect, but it'll probably be
We'll
better.
let Justin Brooks and Jeff Chin design the AI, and we'll know that they're compassionate and smart, and it'll be coming from the right direction.
If I had any technical skills, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, exactly. So I know you've written a few books, but one of the books that you wrote that I wanted to talk about is one called "You Might Go to Prison Even Though You're Innocent." I think we've sort of set this up well. Terrifying premise for most people. What do you most want everyday people, not lawyers, to understand about how vulnerable all of us actually are? And this is one of the things, actually, that just as a little other sidebar, when I was working at the DC Street Law Clinic, which actually I sort of joked, but was not untrue, that you and a number of other fellows, these are second and third year law students, were going out and teaching in prisons and in high schools in the local area. And sadly, there wasn't a lot of difference because the system failed a lot of the high schools that were there. And, one of the things that I remember you imparting in me is like, you need to teach kids their rights because, there are so many times where they do get wrongfully arrested, convicted. They don't know what they're supposed to be doing. And then all of a sudden they end up in prison and they don't have anyone to advocate for them. So I know I sort of yada yada on there a little bit, but tell us a little bit about how vulnerable we all actually are.
Sure. I mean, the title was very intentional of that book. You might go to prison even though you're innocent. And I remember pitching it to my publisher saying, the point of this book is for people to get that they should care about wrongful convictions before it's them or a family member, a loved one, a friend, before they're writing somebody like me and looking for help. Because it's all of our criminal legal system, right? I mean, our taxes pay for it. It's designed to protect us. It's basically a service provided to us that we're all a part of, and we're kind of responsible for it too, of how it operates, the way we're responsible for any part of the government. And yet it has all these failings, some that are so simple and could be remedied, that have just existed forever, mostly due to politics and fear. And the politics of fear are very effective in the United States, where we kind of just scare people into not caring and scare people into heavy sentences and building more prisons and doing all these things instead of being thoughtful about it. So what I do is in the book is I highlight what I've seen as the top 10 reasons innocent people go to prison in America over the past few decades that I've been doing this work. And there are simple things like, people do give false confessions, and we need to start to understand that. And we need to make it mandatory that all confessions are recorded. It's absolutely absurd in an age where everyone's carrying a recording device in their pocket that we don't mandate that they're recorded. And we still haven't done that nationally. We've had to do it kind of jurisdiction by jurisdiction. We've had to reform identification procedures and do simple things like say the police officer who's investigating the case can't be in the room while the procedure is going on because they're not good poker players. And they always say things that mess up the whole process. Like someone might say, it kind of looks like number 3. And then the officer will say, good job. And now when they go to court, they're saying, I'm 100% sure it's that guy.
Right.
And it was really, the jury never hears that really what it was, it kind of looked like that guy.
Right. Right.
And these are such simple things that could be done, and they haven't been done.
Well, one of the things you talk about is, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but that a lot of these people are tired, they're hungry, they're being yelled at, or, you don't think about it, but they're being encouraged, right? And they think I'm doing a good thing. So it sort of reinforces that mentally. And, I think that is something, the human psychology is a piece that we do forget about. And I'm glad that, you were able to cover that in the book because that is an important component. One of the things I do want to talk about is like the race, class, and justice, right? So you said in writing the book, the racial inequity was the hardest part of it. How do you talk about systemic injustice in a way that moves people toward action rather than despair? Because I can imagine that it's pretty easy to say, geez, you look at the stats and there's no way we're ever going to overcome this.
Yeah, fantastic question. It was the hardest chapter of the book to write because every other chapter, it kind of wrote itself from, I was able to say, look, false confessions happen. Let me talk about them. Here's cases where I've freed people from prison who falsely confessed, and here's why. Well, the problem when you talk about race and poverty is I've never walked into a courtroom and said, Your Honor, free my client. They were convicted because they're black, or they're convicted because they're poor, because that's not a legal challenge. That's
Right.
that's not a process, even though we know it permeates every aspect of the system. And so what I had to do in that chapter of the book is just really look at all the studies, look at all the statistics, establish the fact that it's a much higher rate of wrongful conviction of people of color and of people who are poor. In the same way, the whole system has more people of color and more poor people within it. Now, how to not get despondent about it? And some of the stats are kind of like that. I think the way I think about it, and I always try to go back to Martin Luther King Jr., that the arc is long, but it bends towards justice. Lately, it feels like we got to look a lot further back to find that bend. You can't look
Yeah.
2 years, you can't look 5 years. You got to kind of look a long period of time to see, okay, things are better than they were then. But I think what we've done is we've gotten rid of most of the explicit racism in laws, where the laws on their face aren't racist. The problem is implicit racism, and how do we address that? And one of the studies in my book I looked at was they used virtual reality to have people watch trials. And all they did was change the race of the defendant and the race of the victim. And they saw very different results in terms of sentencing, in terms of guilt. And I think it's that implicit bias that we have to start educating people on to understand. Because when you look across a courtroom and the defendant looks like your mother, your father, your sister, your brother, you just have a different visceral reaction to them than if they
Right.
don't. And you have the same thing with victims. Victim looks like your daughter, you have a different reaction to that victim, and all the studies show that to be true. So I think this generation is doing a better job than our generation in terms of that. And I think there will be movement in that direction. It has been somewhat, but we got a long way to go because implicit bias is, you can't really police it. You just have to educate about it. And that's very difficult to do.
Yeah. Well, you have to start somewhere, and bless you for taking those steps and just, again, fighting the good fight. I do want to talk about something where this is kind of a cool part of your journey, and that is that you spent 25 years training lawyers across Latin America and helped launch 38 innocence organizations there. I know a little bit of the answer behind this, but what drew you to that work, and what does it mean to you to have received, I'm going to make sure I get this right, Mexico's, is it Otley Award for that service?
Yeah.
OHTLI.
Totally.
Otley.
Yeah.
Says the guy that can speak Spanish fluently. So,
Well, yeah, as you know, my parents, when I was 12 years old, dropped me in a Puerto Rican high school. And so I spent most of my formative years in Puerto Rico. And I've been teaching at Interamericana Law School for 30 some years. Every year I teach a course down there. And that's part of what drew me to the Malero case. She was a young Puerto Rican woman. I know that pulled at my heartstrings somewhat when I got involved in that case. So, and then when I moved to San Diego, I live right on the border of Mexico. So I started crossing the border and speaking in Tijuana at universities down there. And it just seemed a natural extension of my innocence work in California that because I spoke Spanish and had this connection that I just started doing work in Latin America. And so now, yeah, there's projects from Chile, Argentina, Ecuador, Bolivia, all over South America, all over Central America, and all over Mexico. And I've got a website called inocente.org where I document wrongful convictions in Latin America and give a lot of information for people wanting to start projects in Latin America, statutes in Spanish that could be adoptable in those countries. And so I've been, training lawyers, starting projects, working in Latin America for decades now, and it's been incredibly rewarding to be sort of a pipeline between the U.S. and Latin America with a lot of innovations that we've had in the U.S.
well, it's great. And again, I mean, a lot of thank yous here from me that, you're doing all this great work and really trying to scale it, which I think is the most important thing, and not just being US centric, because that's, I think, a trap we also fall into sometimes. I know we've probably talked about a couple of these already, but I always like to sort of ask some of these bigger picture questions for those that have a strong grasp on what does need to change. And so if there are three things in the American criminal justice system that you could change tomorrow, what would they be, and why haven't they happened yet? That's probably a little bit of a, we know probably why that is, but I'd love to get your take on it.
Yeah, so I would say number one, legalize drugs. The war on drugs is over and we lost. The war on alcohol was over in the Prohibition period and we lost. The amount of resources we spend, the shocking amount of resources we spend on the war on drugs and incarcerating people for that, it just is astounding. And I think the theme that I would have is, first of all, to make the system better, we have to free up tremendous amounts of resources. And right now, we just don't have them. We incarcerate more people than any country in the world. China has 1 billion more people than us, and we incarcerate more people than China. We incarcerate the highest percentage of our population of any country in the world. And there's a direct correlation between crime and poverty. So why is the richest country in the world incarcerating the highest percentage of its population? We have to ask these kind of questions. And so I'd say number one, legalizing drugs. Number two, we should only be incarcerating violent people. using one mode of punishment for everyone, the violent and the non-violent, makes no sense. It's like your kid says, I stole a cookie from the kitchen, and you say, go to your room for an hour. Your kid says, I killed my brother. You say, go to your room for a million hours. It's literally the same
That's a
thing
good
with
point.
no imagination, just
Right.
like time as the only variable. So we do need, I mean, I'm not naive. I'm not some crazy. There are violent people who have to be taken out of society that cannot function within our society. But you know, and I know, after spending time in prisons, that's not the majority of the population. So we need to be more creative and save money. And then once we save all those resources, then we can start not having 95% of cases be plea bargains. We could afford to do trials. We can afford to do investigation. We have some of the poorest trained police in the world. Now, I know a lot of Americans don't want to hear that, and they think like we've got such great, yeah, everything. But the reality is, we give 6 weeks training. We give, we're putting ICE agents out after a month and a half of training, giving people guns. Like in other countries in Europe, they spend like 2 years training police officers. In Britain, they have university degrees. Like it's so we need to pour more resources in to do more training, better lawyers, lower caseloads, all those things that'll ultimately take more bad guys off the streets, leave more good people on the streets, and ultimately have a better system. But it really takes some courage that right now, politics always seems to stop us from doing the right thing.
Well, that's a profound answer and really thoughtful. And obviously, there I'm sure will be people that will react to the legalizing drugs. And I think, just to be clear, you're not saying let everyone have access to drugs, but just like, we have other things where you have to get a license, or you have to go to a doctor, or you have to have a special permit or whatever. That decriminalizing it would, it's doing a greater good by doing something that may be imperfect, but it is the reason why we sort of flood a lot of our prisons with people that, probably, to your point, stole a cookie from the kitchen versus killing their brother.
Yeah, let's just, I guess to make it simpler, let's stop putting people in prison for drug crimes, right? So
Yeah.
it can be regulated. We can do all that. We regulate a million things in society without putting people in prison for it. But the cost of prisons, if people really looked at it, a few years ago, California had to cut $1 billion out of their budget and couldn't afford our university system. And that's the first time people started asking, where'd all the money go? And they found out while we weren't building universities, we were building prisons, and we incarcerated more people than any other state in the union. And people prisons are designed to hide away prisons and the problem. And so people aren't aware of just how much it costs and who's in there. And politicians feed into that on these tough on crime policies to get them elected. And we all pay the cost of that.
Yeah. Well, I have one more serious question, then we'll get into some lighter questions that I tend to ask most of the guests. And so this podcast is about growth, purpose, living at your highest level, which clearly you're doing a tremendous amount of. Where can people engage with you, contribute, get involved? I know you mentioned one of the websites that you'd like people to go to if you're getting involved in your Latin American efforts, and we'll make sure we put all these in the show notes. But where else, like if people want to read you or interact with you or go and volunteer time or money, where can they do that?
Well, I'm on Instagram at Justin O. Brooks on Instagram. I've got
.com.
a website called You Might Go to Prison.com. I've got a lot of information on there. As I said, I'm innocente.org. You can find me on TikTok at Justin O. Brooks, at Facebook, at Blue Sky. I'm every day ranting about these issues somewhere. So welcome to the party. And I've got my book, You Might Go to Prison.com. I'm sorry, You Might Go to Prison Even Though You're Innocent. And also I just finished a book with my son called Collateral Damage that looks at the balance between liberty and security. And that's just now up on Amazon for pre-order.
I love it. Well, I'll have to order a copy. Which son did you write it with?
With Zach. Zach's now,
Nice.
little baby Zach is now a civil rights lawyer, and we wrote a book together.
That's crazy. Well, and Alec, you're a granddaddy, if I remember correctly. And I remember Alec when he was only, I think, a year old. So
Yep. He was a year old when you met him. And now, he was 1989. Now he's got 2 kids. So I've got 2 grandkids.
That's amazing. All right. Well, let's have a little bit of fun. Well, one of them is less fun, but the other three are maybe a little bit more fun. Show or podcast that you are binging right now. Ideally, something light. And we already know you mentioned HGTV, so you like to keep it light, right?
Yeah, I do like to keep it light. I mean, I've been listening lately. It's the laziest podcast ever, but they always have great guests, and they're such. I think because they're like our age and always talking to each other. But I listen to a lot of Smartless.
I knew that's where you were going, and yeah, I agree with you.
And it's the laziest thing. I mean, they don't even know who the guests are, and they just
Yeah.
log in on a Saturday, and those guys are making sold that podcast for $100 million is insane. Part of me wants to not support that, but on the other hand, it's very entertaining and light, and I enjoy it.
Yeah, no, great personalities, and they all interact really well with one another. And the premise, just for anyone tracking along, is one of the members, Jason Bateman, is one of them. I can see the other two guys'
Will
faces,
Arnett,
but Will Arnett, yes, and then the guy from
um,
Will and Grace, yeah. One of them brings on a guest, and the other two are surprised, and then they have to sort of ask questions. And they do have some pretty amazing guests on there, so it is worth
and
a
they're
listen to that
literally
reason.
searching Wikipedia during the
I
interview.
know.
And then the
Well,
guests are saying, that's not real. That must be, you must have got that from Wikipedia. Like, oh, yeah.
Well, the funny thing is, and I'm sure with AI now it's a little bit easier, but I remember, I've been podcasting for 20 years, and there have been a few times where we were at South by Southwest or we were at a conference, and I had to literally sort of come up with questions on the fly, which is never a good thing because you don't really know. I mean, yes, you have Wikipedia, but that doesn't tell you a lot of the story, and you want to research the person. Some cases, the guy Jerry Zucker, who did Airplane and the movie Ghost, and so I listened to his book that he had written with his brother and their partner, and that really gave you a deep dive in terms of their, what they're about and where they came from. So, and you and I had the benefit of us knowing each other for 36 years. You've met a lot of famous people. We know about Greg Kinnear. Who has impressed you the most out of everyone that you've met?
I got to spend some time with Sean Penn. He did a documentary about one of my cases. And, you have this kind of Spicoli image of him growing up. And he was just so smart, so dedicated, so interesting. I actually had dinner with him in a small Italian restaurant in the Bay Area. And everyone around is they're like putting their phones up and pretending not to take pictures of him. And I said, you get used to this? And he said, you know what? If all this existed when I was married to Madonna, I definitely would have killed someone. But he was probably the most interesting famous person that I've met because he was just an impressive guy, the real deal. He goes down to Haiti, he's digging ditches. He
Wow.
goes and digs in, and then he got involved in my case because he read about it and wanted to get involved in it. So yeah, he's probably up there. But yeah, I've been doing this work in California. I've met a lot of famous people.
I'm sure that's a cool one because I think we do remember. I remember him as Spicoli in Fast Times at Ridgemont High, which is the ultimate stoner character. And then you see him in movies like Milk. There was one that I'm trying to remember. He played a guy with Down syndrome, and it was like the Beatles themed background. Most recently, Little Battles or one
One
battle after
battle
another.
after another.
And
He's
just
great.
what a different character he is in every single one of those. And it's nice to know that he has a little levity because he does seem like a very sort of serious,
He's
terse
intense.
guy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
He's
intense is a
intense.
good description of it. All right. Well, speaking of, this is the less sort of fun, serious question, but biggest regret in your life.
I don't. I don't think I have. I mean, of course, like everybody, I could come up with a whole list of things I could have done differently. I switched from being a theater major in college to a business major. I was super boring for a few years. I kind of like to go back and be a theater major. But, I ended up where I'm happy where I ended up. And so I kind of do believe in the butterfly effect. That even though there's a lot of choices I could have made that were better and things maybe I shouldn't have said at different times, but that maybe wouldn't have changed the trajectory of my life. I don't have any major regrets.
Oh, that's good. And it's funny because we talked a little bit. I think we were recording at the time that you and I met, and I was a Russian studies major. And last 30 years, I've been in marketing and, chief marketing officer and just wrote a book. So I had to walk back through history. And the good news now is I at least have sort of a little bit of the cohesive story that I can just point to. But I do believe in that, like everything for a reason, right? My dad was a computer programmer. I was always curious, which is why I started studying Russian. And but the wheels fell off in '91, and the rest is history. So I like that though. Last one, and I'm really interested in this because I know what a music buff you are. So which band or artist would you like to have seen that is no longer around? That it's one of those, shoot, I can't believe I missed out on the Beatles or Prince or whomever.
Yeah, the Beatles would have been nice, although those shows, the sound was terrible and everybody was screaming. I had planned on going to Led Zeppelin if they weren't such babies and they did one show together and then they broke up again a few years ago. I have to say, if there's one person really that I would have loved to see, it would be Bob Marley. He died in
Well, that's a good one.
1980. I
Yeah.
was living in the Caribbean then. Everybody was crying that day. I remember it was a big thing, and I don't think I fully appreciated him at that time. I don't think there's anyone who's a bigger giant in a genre of music than Bob Marley. Bob Marley is reggae, and so yeah, I'm gonna have to go with Robert Nesta Marley.
That's a great one, and I think that you're the first one to choose him. Did you ever watch the movie? Was it called One Love that they made about him? Did you like
And I
it?
went to the musical in London.
Oh, okay.
Not particularly, and Heidi and I left the musical halfway through. It was a little too lightweight. If you really were a fan and had read all the books and really knew him, it was Bob Marley light, and it didn't get deep enough into the politics and the whole person for me.
Well, sadly I'm happy to hear that because Melanie and I stopped watching about half hour in because I was like, this just doesn't feel like it's on point. And so knowing that you're more of an expert than I am. And just one last thing, and I do make this plea, and I think I've probably said it a few times, but I have a deal with my kids, right? So I had an opportunity to go see Nirvana 3 times. I think this was back in 92 or 93. I passed up all 3 times because I had something going on, and I was like, you know what? I'll get a chance to see them later. Fast forward, Kurt Cobain is no longer with us, joined the 27 Club. And so I have a rule now. It's like, if there's someone that you want to go see and we can, within reason, afford to go do it, then we absolutely go and do that so that we don't miss out on an opportunity of a Bob Marley or a Kurt Cobain. So,
Yeah, I had the same thing when Led Zeppelin got back together, whatever that was, 15 years ago, and they did that one show at the O2 Arena in London. I said to Zach, I'm like, my son Zach, wherever the next show is, we're going. Like, this is a regret I didn't have in the 70s when I could have seen them. And then they just couldn't play together.
so there you go, people. If there's someone you want to see, go see them.
Go see them.
Yep. Well, Justin, this has been a true pleasure. It's great to see your face. Thank you for making the time. Thank you for all that you're doing. It's truly an honor to call you a friend, and just watching your journey and how you've, continued to fight the good fight after, all these years is really impressive.
Thanks, my friend. It's absolutely a pleasure.
All right. Let me hit stop here.